The sound of the slap cracked across the Seoul Grand Gallery, picked up by a dozen live-streaming cameras and broadcast to 3 million viewers worldwide. Ivy Caldwell's head snapped back, her signature afro halo trembling as she stumbled against her own centerpiece painting. "You think this regal act masks the trash I found in a Brooklyn basement?" Evan Roth sneered, his face flushed with expensive scotch and unearned audacity. The elite of Seoul froze. They weren't looking at the drunk American, they were looking at the man rising from the front row. "Do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Help me get to thousands of subscribers creating these epic love stories where broken women find their power and the right man. Love to protect without controlling takes serious work. And your support helps us bring you more stories like this. Turn on those notifications so you never miss when love, loyalty, and lethal protection collide." Now let's get into Ivy's journey to reclaiming everything. Kang Jaehyun stood with the lethality of a drawn blade, 6 feet of tailored black silk and porcelain-sharp fury. As his dark, obsidian eyes locked onto Evan, the gallery's heavy oak doors clicked shut, locked from the outside by men with identical lapel pins. Evan had come to humiliate a diversity hire, but he had just physically assaulted the heart of the Korean mafia's most dangerous heir. In 60 seconds, Evan's flight back to New York would be the least of his worries. The world was watching, but in this room, Jaehyun was the only judge, jury, and executioner. The Brooklyn basement. Evan called it mentorship. Looking back, Ivy recognized it for what it truly was, a slow, deliberate erasure of everything that made her dangerous. It started small. He'd stand behind her in her cramped Brooklyn studio apartment, hands on her shoulders, watching her paint. "The colors are aggressive," he'd murmur, his breath warm against her neck. "You're trying to make a statement when you should be making art. Collectors want to feel sophisticated, not confronted." She'd believed him because he had the credentials she lacked, published reviews in Art Forum, a Rolodex thick with gallery directors, invitations to openings she could only dream of attending. So she softened her palette, muted the vibrant golds and crimsons that celebrated her grandmother's Nigerian fabrics, diluted the deep browns and blacks that honored her father's Louisiana roots. Her canvases became beige whispers of what they'd once been, and Evan called it growth. He controlled everything with surgical precision. When galleries expressed interest, he'd handle the negotiations, always returning with rejection letters that felt like personal failures. They loved the concept but felt the execution wasn't quite there yet, he'd explain, pulling her close as she cried into his chest. "We'll keep working. You're just not ready for that level yet." She never saw those emails, never knew that Meredith Cho from the Soho Contemporary had called her work breathtaking and offered a solo exhibition, or that Daniel Ortiz wanted her for a group show featuring emerging Black artists. Evan had responded to both with the same message, carefully typed from Ivy's own email account while she slept. "Thank you for the interest, but I'm pursuing other opportunities at this time." He'd saved the drafts, documentation of his devotion to shaping her career properly, protecting her from exploitation by galleries that only wanted her for diversity optics. The night everything crystallized, Ivy had been searching for her portfolio. A client from Evan's network supposedly wanted to see her recent work. She'd found his laptop open on the kitchen counter, email tab glowing. Her own address stared back at her from the sender field, and below it, months of correspondence she'd never written. Gallery offers, commission requests, an artist residency in Paris, all declined in her name, all opportunities stolen while he whispered in her ear that she wasn't good enough yet. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the evidence. 23 emails. 23 doors Evan had closed while positioning himself as the only one who believed in her. She heard his key in the lock, his familiar footsteps, and something inside her finally, irrevocably broke open. Not broken down this time, broken free. "You've been sabotaging me." The words came out flat, emotionless as he walked through the door. Evan froze, then smiled that patient smile she'd once found reassuring. "Ivy, you're being dramatic." "23 galleries, Evan. 23 times you told them no using my email." She stood, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt taller than him. "You were never my mentor. You were my cage." He lunged for the laptop, but she'd already forwarded everything to herself. The mask slipped completely, his face contorting into something ugly and desperate. "You ungrateful bitch, I made you. Without me, you're nothing but another starving artist with a sob story." That was the moment Ivy Caldwell learned the most important lesson of her life. The people who try hardest to convince you you're nothing are the ones most terrified you'll realize you're everything. 3 weeks later, she was on a plane to Seoul, and Evan Roth became nothing more than a cautionary tale she'd someday have the strength to forget. Seoul hit Ivy like a baptism in ice water, shocking, disorienting, and exactly what she needed to wake up. She landed at Incheon Airport with 2 overstuffed suitcases, a tourist visa that would expire in 90 days, and the kind of reckless hope that only comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. The cultural exchange program she'd hastily applied to had accepted her portfolio with surprising enthusiasm, offering a modest stipend and connections to local galleries. It wasn't much, but it was 5,000 miles from Evan Roth, and that made it everything. The first month was brutal in ways Ivy hadn't anticipated. She found a tiny apartment in Hongdae, barely large enough for a bed and easel, sandwiched between a noisy chicken restaurant and a coin karaoke bar. The language barrier turned simple tasks into exhausting negotiations. She taught conversational English to businessmen who stared at her afro with undisguised curiosity, waitressed at an expat bar in Itaewon where drunk tourists asked to touch her hair, and spent weekends sketching portraits of K-pop fans in Myeongdong just to make rent. But the art scene was the hardest rejection of all. Gallery owners smiled politely at her portfolio, then explained in halting English that her work was very interesting, but not suitable for Korean collectors. Translation: too black, too bold, too foreign for a market that prized subtlety and tradition. One curator actually suggested she try painting hanbok or cherry blossoms, something more relatable to local aesthetics. Ivy spent exactly 1 week trying to paint what they wanted. The canvases looked like corpses of her former self, lifeless and dishonest. She destroyed them all in a single night, slashing through the muted watercolors with a palette knife until her hands shook and tears streamed down her face. Then she started painting the truth again. She painted her grandmother's hands braiding her hair on Sunday mornings, her father's construction boots caked in Brooklyn dirt. The loneliness of being the only black woman in a subway car full of curious stares. The strange freedom of being invisible in a country where nobody expected anything from her because they didn't know what box to put her in. She painted her afro as a crown of defiance, her brown skin glowing against Seoul's neon nights, her mixed heritage not as confusion, but as conversation between continents. Every brushstroke became an act of reclamation, taking back the voice Evan had spent 2 years trying to silence. Her first solo exhibition was in a cramped Harajuku-inspired gallery in Hongdae that maybe 40 people attended. The owner, a young Korean woman who'd studied in New York, gave Ivy the space for free after seeing 3 pieces. Most attendees were other expats, fellow artists, students curious about the Black American painter their friends had mentioned. But one man stood apart from the scattered crowd, radiating the kind of quiet authority that made the room unconsciously reorganize itself around him. Kang Jaehyun studied each painting with an intensity that unnerved her, his dark eyes absorbing every detail like he was reading her autobiography in oil and canvas. When he finally approached, his English was flawless and his first words were simple. "Your work is honest. That's rare." Ivy had no idea she was speaking to the most dangerous man in Seoul. She only knew that for the first time since leaving New York, someone was seeing her art exactly as she intended it to be seen. Seoul taught Ivy that survival could look like triumph if you painted it the right colors. Her first solo exhibition was in a cramped Hongdae gallery that barely 40 people attended, most of them other struggling artists nursing cheap wine and cheaper dreams. But one man stood apart from the crowd, and when Kang Jaehyun entered a room, everyone felt it. He moved through the space like darkness given form, 6 feet of tailored black silk and porcelain-sharp features that seemed carved rather than born. 2 men in equally expensive suits shadowed him at a respectful distance, their eyes scanning exits and crowds with professional vigilance. Ivy watched him study her paintings with an intensity that made her breath catch, not the performative appreciation of collectors trying to seem cultured, but genuine engagement. He stopped at each canvas, silent and still, absorbing every brushstroke like he was reading her soul in oil and pigment. When he finally approached her, his voice was smooth, controlled, almost gentle. "Your work is honest. That's rare." Up close, his eyes were obsidian, dark and bottomless, revealing nothing while somehow seeing everything. "You paint anger like someone who's learned to make it beautiful instead of letting it destroy you." Ivy's heart stumbled. No one had ever described her work that way. Critics called it raw or ethnic or overly emotional, code words for too much, too black, too true. But this stranger in his immaculate suit saw exactly what she'd been trying to achieve, the transformation of pain into power, rage into art. "I'd like to purchase your entire collection," Jaehyun said, his tone making it clear this wasn't negotiation but statement. "Not because I pity your struggle, because I recognize what you've built from it." Ivy blinked, certain she'd misheard. Her entire collection represented 8 months of work, 12 pieces that galleries in Gangnam wouldn't even display. "I don't understand. You haven't asked the price or—" "I know the price. I know your story." He handed her a business card, pristine white with embossed black lettering. Kang Jaehyun, CEO, Kang Enterprises. A phone number, nothing more. "I researched you before I came, the American artist who fled to Seoul to remember who she was. I respect that kind of reinvention." There was something in the way he said reinvention that felt personal, like he understood it from experience rather than observation. Behind him, an elderly Korean man entering the gallery saw Jaehyun and immediately bowed so low his forehead nearly touched his knees. Jaehyun acknowledged it with barely a nod, and the man scurried past with trembling hands and downcast eyes. That was Ivy's first clue that Kang Jaehyun was far more than an art collector with good taste. He didn't haggle or ask for certificates of authenticity. He simply transferred the full asking price that night, plus 20%, with a single instruction. "Keep creating. Don't let anyone convince you to paint smaller again." As he left, Ivy stood alone in the emptied gallery, staring at the bare walls where her paintings had hung and the bank notification glowing on her phone. She didn't know who Kang Jaehyun really was yet. She didn't know about the empire he controlled from the shadows or the blood that had built his family's name, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This man saw her. Not her potential or her diversity or her marketability. Just her, exactly as she was, and he'd paid a fortune to prove it mattered. 6 months after their first meeting, Ivy stood in Jaehyun's penthouse overlooking the glittering sprawl of Seoul, her reflection ghosting against floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind her, she felt him approach with that silent precision that should have unsettled her but somehow didn't. "You need to know what I really am," Jaehyun said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of confession. "Before this goes any further." Ivy turned to face him. In the low amber light of his living room, he looked like carved marble. Beautiful, cold, untouchable. Except she'd learned over months of careful conversation and stolen glances that he wasn't untouchable at all. He was just heavily guarded. "I know you're not just a tech investor," she replied steadily. "Seoul talks, Jaehyun, even to outsiders like me." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He moved to the bar cart, poured 2 glasses of whiskey neither of them would drink, buying time. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, deliberate. "My family controls significant portions of Seoul's underground economy. Protection, entertainment districts, certain financial channels the government pretends don't exist. I inherited this empire at 23 when my father was killed." He turned to face her fully, obsidian eyes searching hers for judgment. "I've spent 9 years trying to legitimize our operations. Move us into legal territory, but some things can't be erased overnight. Some debts can't be forgiven, some enemies don't forget." Ivy absorbed this, the confirmation of whispered rumors making flesh. She should have felt afraid. Instead, she felt something closer to recognition. "I was with someone who made me feel like nothing," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "For 2 years, he convinced me that my art, my voice, my entire identity was worthless without his approval. He didn't hit me, not physically, but he dismantled me piece by piece until I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror." She watched Jaehyun's hands tighten around his glass, the only visible reaction to her words. "When I left New York, I was running from more than just him. I was running from the woman he'd turned me into, someone small, someone apologetic for existing." Ivy stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You've never once made me feel like I need to be anything other than who I am. You've never tried to reshape me or manage me or control what I create. You just see me." "Because you're extraordinary exactly as you are," Jaehyun said, his voice dropping to something raw and unguarded. "I've built my life on control, on calculated moves and protected positions. But with you, I don't want control. I want partnership." Ivy reached up, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "Then we protect each other. You help me remember I'm not the broken thing he tried to create. I help you remember you're not just the legacy you inherited." When he kissed her, it wasn't the careful restraint of their previous encounters. It was claiming and surrendering in equal measure, porcelain meeting steel, both unyielding yet both willing to bear the other's weight. "If he ever finds you," Jaehyun murmured against her mouth, "if he ever tries to hurt you again, he'll learn exactly what I'm capable of." Ivy pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "And if your past tries to destroy what you're building, I'll stand with you, not behind you, with you." In that moment, surrounded by Seoul's endless lights and their shared scars, they became something neither had been before. Protected and protector, wounded and healer, two people choosing each other despite, or perhaps because of, everything that had tried to break them. The Seoul Grand Gallery gleamed with champagne light and whispered ambition. Ivy's paintings lined the pristine white walls like declarations of war, bold, unapologetic celebrations of blackness, womanhood, and survival that the New York art world had told her to suppress. She stood at the center of it all in her black evening dress, her afro a magnificent crown, accepting congratulations from collectors who spoke her name with reverence rather than condescension. Kang Jaehyun watched from his position near the entrance, pride evident in the subtle curve of his mouth. He'd deliberately positioned himself away from Ivy tonight, allowing her to shine without his shadow. But his men were everywhere. Minho by the service exit, Sungjin near the champagne fountain, Doyeon observing from the second-floor balcony. Protection that looked like coincidence to anyone who didn't understand how carefully Jaehyun choreographed safety around the woman he loved. The gallery director was just introducing Ivy to a prominent Seoul Times critic when the atmosphere shifted. A drunk American stumbled through the entrance, his rumpled designer suit and bloodshot eyes cutting through the refined elegance like a knife through silk. Evan Roth looked like 3 years had chewed him up and spit him out. His face was puffy, his hairline receding, his swagger replaced by something desperate and bitter. He'd come to Seoul for an international art symposium, but that wasn't why he was here tonight. Social media had betrayed Ivy's success, her rising star impossible to ignore, and Evan couldn't tolerate it. The woman he'd convinced was nothing had become everything without him. Ivy's blood turned to ice the moment she saw him, every muscle locked, old fears flooding back in nauseating waves. For 3 heartbeats, she was 23 again, small and worthless. Then she felt Jaehyun's eyes on her across the room, steady as an anchor, and remembered exactly who she'd become. The Seoul Grand Gallery gleamed with crystalline lights and champagne flutes catching reflections of Ivy's paintings. 300 of Korea's elite moved through the space in designer silk and measured conversation, their voices a sophisticated hum beneath the classical music. Ivy stood near her centerpiece work, radiant in fitted black, accepting congratulations with the grace of a woman who'd fought for every inch of this moment. Then Evan Roth stumbled through the entrance and the temperature dropped. He looked diminished by 3 years and too much whiskey, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot and locked on Ivy with disturbing intensity. Several guests turned, conversations faltering as the drunk American wove through the crowd with aggressive purpose. "There she is!" Evan's voice carried across the hushed gallery, too loud, slurring slightly. "My little protégé, all grown up and playing artist." Ivy's blood went cold, but she kept her spine straight. "Evan, this is a private event. You need to leave." "Private?" He laughed, harsh and bitter. "I taught you everything and I don't even get an invitation? That's rich." He stumbled closer, and she could smell the alcohol radiating from him. "Look at all these people, thinking you're some self-made success story. They don't know the truth, do they? That you were nothing when I found you. A quota hire with delusions." Across the room, Kang Jaehyun rose from his seat with lethal precision. "You didn't teach me anything worth keeping," Ivy said, her voice steel wrapped in silk. Evan's face twisted with rage. "I made you, you ungrateful—" His hand cracked across her face before she could move. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the frozen gallery. Ivy stumbled, her afro trembling, pain exploding across her cheek. Then Jaehyun was there, moving through the crowd like death in a tailored suit, his obsidian eyes promising devastation. Jaehyun didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply reached into his jacket and withdrew a sleek tablet, the screen casting a cold blue glow across his porcelain features as 300 pairs of eyes watched in absolute silence. "Evan Roth," he said, his tone conversational, almost gentle. 42 years old, failed art critic, currently unemployed. He tilted the screen toward the nearest camera, and the live stream that had broadcast Evan's violence now displayed something far more damning. Financial records scrolled across the display, bank statements, email chains, screenshots of deleted social media messages. "You embezzled $73,000 from emerging artists over the past 4 years, Jaehyun continued, his obsidian eyes never leaving Evan's face as the color drained from it. "Promising gallery placements in exchange for upfront fees. You delivered on exactly none of them." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The journalist from Arts Korea was recording everything, her phone trained on both Jaehyun's tablet and Evan's crumbling expression. "You've been dismissed from 5 consulting positions, 3 for sexual harassment, 2 for financial impropriety." Jaehyun swiped to another screen, and testimonials appeared. Women's faces, their stories. Maya Hernandez, Jennifer Park, Aisha Williams. "Ivy wasn't your first victim. She won't be your last unless someone stops you." Evan's knees buckled slightly. Around them, Seoul's elite pressed closer, their phones capturing every second of his destruction. "By tomorrow morning," Jaehyun said, his voice dropping to that lethal whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the gallery. "Every major publication will have this documentation. Your name will be synonymous with predator. Your career will be ash." He closed the tablet with a soft click. "I don't need violence, Mr. Roth. The truth is far more permanent." Evan opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. Jaehyun had already turned away, dismissing him as thoroughly as if he'd never existed at all. The gallery doors closed behind Evan Roth with a finality that echoed through the silent space. 2 of Jaehyun's men flanked him as they disappeared into the Seoul night, not dragging, not forcing, simply guiding a man who'd already been erased. The crowd remained frozen, phones still raised, recording a moment that would ripple through the international art world for years to come. Ivy stood at the center of it all, her hand still pressed against her burning cheek, her emerald dress catching the gallery lights like armor. She could feel 300 pairs of eyes on her. Pity, shock, curiosity, admiration, all bleeding together into a suffocating weight. This was the moment she could crumble. The moment Evan's ghost could win even in defeat. Then Jaehyun's hand appeared at the small of her back. Not possessive, not controlling, just present. A reminder that she wasn't alone, but that this moment belonged to her and her alone. Ivy straightened her spine, adjusted her dress, let her hand fall away from her face, refusing to hide the mark Evan had left. She walked toward the small stage at the gallery's center, each step more confident than the last, her natural afro catching light like a crown she'd finally stopped apologizing for. The gallery director moved to hand her the microphone, her expression uncertain, offering an escape if Ivy wanted it. Ivy took the microphone instead. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice carried through the space, steady despite the tremor underneath. "I apologize for that disruption, but in a way it was fitting." She gestured to the paintings surrounding them, bold, unapologetic celebrations of her heritage, her journey, her refusal to be diminished. This exhibition is called Reclamation, because that's what these 3 years in Seoul have been for me, reclaiming my voice, my vision, my right to exist in spaces that told me I didn't belong. Ivy's eyes swept the crowd, landing briefly on Jaehyun. He stood at the back now, shadowed, watching with those obsidian eyes that saw everything. Not her savior, her witness. "You just saw a man who spent 2 years convincing me I was worthless without him, who told me my blackness was too loud, my talent too raw, my dreams too ambitious for someone like me." Her voice grew stronger, the tremor disappearing entirely. "He came here tonight because my success without him was unbearable, because watching me thrive was a mirror he couldn't stand to look into." Several guests nodded, the journalist from Art Asia International writing frantically, already composing the article that would reshape the narrative. "But here's what he never understood," Ivy continued, her grip tightening on the microphone. "He was never part of my story. He was just an obstacle I had to overcome to become who I was always meant to be, and these paintings, every single one, they're proof that I did." She paused, letting the words settle like a benediction. "So please enjoy the art, celebrate with me, not because I survived him, but because I became myself in spite of him. That's the only revenge worth having." The gallery erupted in applause, genuine, thunderous, transformative. Not pity for a victim, but respect for a woman who'd reclaimed her sovereignty in real time. Ivy stepped off the stage and back into her exhibition. Collectors approached with new reverence. Critics asked questions with actual curiosity. And through it all, Jaehyun remained in the shadows, exactly where he belonged, close enough to protect, distant enough to let her shine alone. She'd come to Seoul broken. She was leaving this night whole, and Evan Roth was already fading into exactly what he deserved to be, a footnote in someone else's triumph. If you loved watching her reclaim her power with Jaehyun in the shadows, protecting but never controlling, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about love, loyalty. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter. Drop a comment below. Should I write more stories about powerful couples who protect each other as equals? Your support keeps these stories coming.